What's going on, everybody? We are back with another episode in we're doing season 3 right now, and I wanted to do season 3 as a kind of women's empowerment season. I've had quite a few guys on here that have given their stories, and I started reaching out and putting posts out online looking for females because I think it's detrimental to have both sides out there. So with me today, I have the lovely Tori Smith out of Kent, Ohio. What Tori's doing right now is she is a residential aide and tech, and she's going for her CDC at Pinnacle Treatment Services in Kent, Ohio. Victoria's got a story like everybody else, and it's kind of her story is what led her to get into this profession. I think she's got a great story, and that's why we've got her on today. And so, without any further delay, I'm going to let Tori take it away. Tori, go ahead and just say hi to everybody real quick.
Hi.
Uh, uh, Tori, why don't you just briefly get into what your childhood was like and kind of who you are? Who is Tori?
I mean, it was just kind of me and my mom and my brother growing up, other than, some stepdads here and there, which I did end up with a wonderful stepdad who helped raise me from birth. He's my brother's dad. When I was about 5, my mom was with another person, and she ended up losing a child when he was 4 months old. So we lost our baby brother, and that kind of made our childhood that we knew come to a halt. My mom was very out of it for a very long time, and I can't fault her for that. I mean, I don't know how I would be if I lost a child, especially one that I had held for 4 months and had everywhere in my house, my car, my everywhere. So my childhood changed dramatically. We started spending a lot of time with my grandmother, who is just the most amazing person. Um, and my mom did the best she could. So it was just us growing up. I do have an older brother and a younger sister that I found out about when I was about 18, but I didn't grow up with them or anything. But for the most part, I did have a pretty decent childhood. It wasn't filled with any drugs or alcohol or anything like that. There was no physical abuse. There was some mental stuff that went around. A lot of the men were not quite nice. But we made it. We made it through. Um, but me and my brother were pretty close for a long time until we were about 16. We're getting that relationship back together now. But then when I was 18 and I found out that, my dad wasn't my real dad, that kind of shook my entire world, not gonna lie. But I did get an amazing brother out of it. He is one of the most treasured things that I have. Um, but it turns out that my biological father is an alcoholic. And so that, I guess, is where that gene came in. So when I was 18 and, trying to escape my house, I ended up with someone, and I ended up having a miscarriage. And that guy was on spice at the time. And if I had any real addiction, it was spice. Like, um, like the K2
What?
spice,
Oh, okay.
the stuff they sold in the stores as legal weed.
Okay. Yeah.
That was my very first experience with any kind of drug at all. I mean, in high school, I was literally like I did not get in trouble for anything. Like I was a good kid. I got good grades. I didn't skip school. I hung out like with the good kids. Like I did not do anything to, you know, not make my mother proud. I was a huge people pleaser, and I could not handle disappointing anyone in my life. So that was a big thing. I think I like smoked weed twice and drank twice in high school. Like that was like my bad bout. My mom knew about it every time I did it. Like that. I mean, I did not do anything wrong. If we were gonna pick a kid, it was probably gonna be my brother to be the one to, get in trouble and, mess around. And
Yeah.
he ended up being the good kid, I guess we'll go with. But so then I got on Spice for about, I think it was like 4 years. And that took us to some crazy places. And the thing about the spice was it had physical withdrawals, kind of like heroin, not quite as bad, nowhere near as bad, but it was still there. You still had the cravings, you still had the, crankiness, the craving for it. You wouldn't eat, you wouldn't sleep, you were everything. So,
So can I ask something real quick? What?
yeah.
Because for all intents and purposes, spice was like weed.
Hmm.
So, do you know what the physical difference was that made spice different from weed, where you would physically withdraw from it? And then I want to touch on another point real quick, but because I'm not
They
familiar with spice.
they basically took like what a weed plant would be, maybe not weed specifically, but they took what like a marijuana plant would be and then they would spray it with chemicals. So it was just covered in these chemicals. And then, when it started like affecting people, the FDA, started banning all of those chemicals. So then they started changing the chemicals and not testing them. And it got to the point where, right after I quit, actually, it started liquefying people's insides from like one or two hits. Like
And this stuff
it
was
was
available at
bad.
gas stations.
Yep, it was available everywhere.
Well,
And
dude, it's crazy that so I'm just going to talk real briefly about bath salts because I believe this was around the same time, right?
it was,
And
yes.
so for anybody that was a drug addict back in like mid 2000s, and I was a hardcore like heroin, meth, like that. Not to take away from anything that you called that was not at all the purpose of my comment, but I remembered a buddy of mine came over and he was talking about bath salts. And I'm like, what? I was like, what are you injecting and snorting bath salts for? And he's like, oh well, it's legal. You can get it at the store. And I'm like, wait, what? Say that again. And so he took me down to like the little head shop in Kent, and I walked in, and you were, for all intents and purposes, buying meth over the counter,
Yeah.
and it was way worse. Like I would do a little bit of it, and I would be up for 4 days, and I it was wild, but it was the same thing. People were going in and the spice. I never tried it because I'm an extremist. When I do something and I get to that next level, I'm looking for the next big thing.
Right.
I'm not going backwards to smoking weed anymore. I'm looking for how can I get even higher. And that's wild because they were selling all this stuff in the stores. It was crazy to say the least.
That's a part of it too, because the guy I was with, he he wasn't the greatest, we'll go with sometimes, and he had a lot of rules for me. And me being a people pleaser, like
Yeah,
okay, but I also have this thing that I discovered about myself that I rebel when people try to control me. And like, at the time when we were doing Spice, he was also doing bath salts. He was very anti-drug, but he was doing bath salts and he was doing
it's
Spice
legal,
and
but it's
all
legal.
that. Right. It's legal. It's legal. So, and actually he was hanging out a couple of his friends that were genuine meth addicts and they were like, "Oh my God, this is like the best meth I've ever had in my life," da 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 da. And they were doing it constantly. And he looked at me one day and he was like, "You are never allowed to try speed." He's like, "You would annoy the living shit out of me. You are never allowed to try speed." Now that's back in like 2011. When I left him, that thought was still in the back of my brain, like, oh, I can't try speed. Okay, we're gonna do that now.
Hold my sight.
I'm like, yeah, no. So like, but see, I didn't realize that I would, because like I didn't like smoking weed. I didn't like drinking. I didn't like anything, but spice took me out of myself, you know? And like I was one of those people, like some people, like true weed smokers do not like spice because it's too high, like
Yeah.
it's too high. So like but me, I needed to disappear. I went to like I would get so high that I would hallucinate, right? And like they called it one of his friends was like, "Oh, she's going to Tory land again." And I swear every day after that time, this golden gates would appear and say Toryland, and I had the choice to either walk through the gates and be too high or stay out of the gates and not. And it was a whole experience. Like, have you seen the movie Inside Out or Osmosis Jones?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, basically, they're these movies about like what's going on inside your body. Like Osmosis Jones came back out in like the 90s, and it's like all of your blood cells are individual people, and the Tylenol is somebody, and all of that. Or like, and Inside Out is about your emotions in your head, right? And it's like
Are
physical
they like
people
memory
in your
films,
head,
or are they like you watch them while you're high to like trip you out? Because that sounds
right?
like that would freak me out if the blood cells were all people in my body.
It will like literally, I'd be sitting next to him, and the one day I was like punching him, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, the kids are on a field trip to my brain and they're in control right now." And like he's like, "What?" Like it literally was like I was inside. Everybody was its own working part and person. Like there was once he was sitting there talking to me and I kept telling him, I was like, shh. And he's like, what? And I was like, shh, stop talking. And he's like, why? And I was like, because every time I open up my mouth, the vacuums are flying out and I'm losing all my vacuums and I'm just watching this counter go down. Like all these vacuums are flying off my tongue. Like it was
What the hell?
insane.
I
Like
don't think I ever tripped like that on acid or on
I
anything.
never did either. I never did either. I never experienced anything like that on acid or anything. Like, so that's what I needed in that time, or so I thought. I couldn't cope. And then,
Yeah,
you know, that 10 years with him was a very trying and hard time. It broke me. It was
yeah,
10 years of my life and it broke me. But after 4 years, we got sober. And within 3 days of getting sober, I had my son, my first son. So I think that was just God, the universe, whoever you believe in, working its magic. I mean, and it kept me sober. It kept me off of spice, though I didn't really think about it as being sober because I didn't think I was a drug addict. It was just spice. It was legal. I got it from the store. It's not a drug. Just because, everybody else is pulling scrap out of yards to go get it or, stealing their mother's money out of their purse or anything, it's still legal. It's not a drug.
yeah.
So to me, I
Well,
never
no,
even
and that's I've had this conversation before too. I think that that's one of the biggest reasons that alcohol is such a problem in society. It's legal and people don't look at it as being a problem. It's been normalized to the point where it's I'm not an alcoholic. It's available in the store. I can go down and I'm okay. I can white knuckle it for 3 days and then go back out and have a couple drinks and then white knuckle it for 3 more days. But it's too readily available. That's where the problem with the spice and the bath salts and everything came in. Is it was basically just putting narcotics on store shelves.
pretty much. It was a rough time. I watched a lot of people go downhill.
I want to talk real quick too. You keep going back to a bad relationship, and obviously we're not going to put anybody's name out there, but I too was in a very toxic relationship for probably 10 years. It was my first marriage. It was 10 years, and I think long term when it comes to addicts, and I've got a really good friend. His name's Drifter. He runs sober. And him and I talk. He's a truck driver too, so we talk quite a bit. And lately we've been talking about toxic relationships and how that affects you long term and how that affects being a drug addict. And so, I mean, you keep it's, and I don't know your relationship. I'm just going to speak off of mine, but I do the same thing. I minimize it. And I'm like, oh, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. But here, 10 years later, and I'm only bringing this up because of the comments that you're making, and
Hmm.
I call people out, so I'm not calling you out
No,
on.
you're
I
fine.
don't know your relationship, but it's one of those things. I did the same thing for a long time where it was bad, but it wasn't that bad. It was, but now 10 years down the road, it caused so much trauma and like PTSD in me that I'm not even the same. It's taken me 4 years in my current marriage and relationship to get me back to that point where I'm like trusting, where I'm not questioning what she's going to do. And my wife, I trust my wife with every bit of my soul, but that past and that trauma and me minimizing it and not dealing with it on the front end, it's caused me long term to be like, I side eye everything. That little like light bulb flips on every time she says something that like flashes me back 10 years ago. I'm like, hold on a minute, wait, what? Like,
I'm totally the same way. It was really bad. I mean, I ended up in a domestic violence shelter for about 3 months afterwards, because I was so terrified when I left. Um,
yeah,
it had gotten really bad in the end, and I was so, so terrified. And honestly, if it would not have been for three people in my life that, just like because I minimized a lot of it even while I was in it. I was miserable, but at the same time, like I wasn't I wasn't coping. I was like, okay, well, it's not as bad as it used to be, you know. But then it would get really bad again, and it I wasn't it. It was to the point where I didn't have friends anymore. Like I literally was not allowed to have friends. So I found a way to have friends. I became best friends with his oldest son's mom. And so, I mean, that's not really somebody you can kick out of
I
your
love
life.
that.
So, I mean, she was my very best friend. She was my ride or die for like a very, very long time. I mean, that woman helped save my life, and it let me keep my stepson. in my life afterwards. I helped raise that boy since he was 1 year old. And, I was in this relationship for 10 years. That boy was my heart and soul, just like my own two boys are. And so to this day, he's 13 and he's still a part of my life. And I love him with everything. And then, I became best friends with one of his friends. That he wasn't like one of the guys that, was a meth addict back in the day and, like was doing the bath salts with him and everything. I couldn't stand him back in the day. Oh my gosh, get that kid away from me. But, at some point, he had kids and I fell in love with his kids too. And they're like my little niece and nephew. They're my kids' best friends. And, he was one of those people. And his aunt, they are my, they were my three best friends. Like I found people that I knew would not leave me and I needed them and I needed their strength. Now I'm the one that pulled it out and found the strength to leave, but without them having my back, I wouldn't have made it out. And
Yeah.
to this day, I don't know if I'd have made it out alive.
Well, and you even said, I mean, there has I post a lot on social media, and I I I'm very open about my family, and it's not all the good times. I post about the bad stuff too, because I don't ever want that false sense to like push out to people like, hey, life is great, my life is amazing. Hey, look at me. It's but you made a comment there, and 2 years ago I relapsed pretty hard. And I had thought about leaving my wife, and you made a comment about losing your stepson, and I have a 10-year-old stepson too, and my wife has helped raise my kids since they were little, and it's hard when I mean when you throw all that into the mix. And I wasn't trying to leave because of anything she did. I was leaving because of my own bullshit. You know what I mean? But then to think about losing the kids, I can only imagine being in a bad situation such as yourself, like where there's domestic violence, where there's what sounds like narcissism. I'm not gonna diagnose them, but I mean generally that's and what just sounds like toxic behaviors all around. I mean, if you're only allowed to have friends that were his relatives, but then you throw the kid in there and you're like, I can't leave. Like I can't. Even so, I commend you. I mean, for coming out of a toxic relationship. And there being kids involved. That's a huge step. That says a lot about you getting yourself out of there. I've been talking to somebody else recently that I keep telling her, I'm like, you have to choose you first. Like you you're no use to anybody else unless you love yourself and you put yourself first. So I commend you for getting out of that relationship. And it's
It was
it's great that
literally
you
the
shared
hardest
your.
thing I've ever done. It was
Oh,
literally
I'm
the hardest
sure.
thing. I mean,
I'm
ripping
sure.
my kids away from their father. And don't get me wrong, we have a decent relationship now. We're good co-parents. But it took us a long time to get to that point. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
say that it didn't, but I can't
Well,
them from their
you don't
father.
have
So,
control. Yeah,
hmm
it's there's no more control. So the there's no reason for him to fight with you because there's no more control. He knows he
right.
can't control you. So why is he? Yeah. No, that's good stuff though.
I mean, don't get me
So
wrong. He
there's
took me to court 3 times for custody. So,
well, that tends to be the game, and that drives me nuts too. I mean, even in my first marriage, the only time I wasn't allowed to see my kids was when I was being a complete piece of shit. Like there was like 2 years where, and even then my kids were still available to me. I just had to have visitation at my mom's house or at my sister's house. I never understood the let's hold the kids, let's fight over the kids, let's. It should be you should be a collective front when it comes to your kids. You should be working on the same page. My current wife and her ex husband, I am envious of their relationship. They were best friends all through like middle school, high school. Then they got married, and they were like, "Oh, this is kind of weird," but they ended up having a kid, so they got divorced. They co-parent amazingly, and I look at I look at my past relationship sometimes, and I'm like, I've been in tears over it before, honestly, because there's just been times where I'm like, I just want that. Like there's no reason that kids should have to put up with bullshit from their parents. They've already went through a
hmm
divorce.
it
That's
was a
huge.
rough
It's
time,
best to at
but
least co-parent
we
with them.
figured it out. Yeah, like we're pretty good about, our time together and everything like that. We talk now, we co-parent pretty well. And I've never kept them from him. There was that first summer that they didn't really see him when I left, but after that, like, when the court proceedings were done and everything like that, like we've had a set schedule ever since and been okay.
That's
Not to
awesome.
say we didn't fight along the way, but we're to a good place now, so it works out.
Okay, so you were doing the spice. You were out partying, going to Victoria Land. What was the moment where you were like, "Hey, I'm done with all this. This is stupid."
Um, Actually, it got to be too much, and like we were watching people just go down and down and down, and honestly, we just didn't want to do it anymore. But the weird thing about it was when you decided you were ready to be done with Spice, there was no withdrawals, there was no nothing. And like a friend of ours had come through, and he had been the worst person on Spice I had ever seen in my life. And he was like, "Yeah, dude," he's like, "I just when I decided I was done, I was done, and like I didn't feel anything, and I didn't need it." And we were like, "Bullshit." I mean, like with heroin, it doesn't matter. I mean, you're going through it. But like, I don't know what it was. It was like a brain chemistry thing. And so when we got sober, we went down to Tennessee and moved in with my mom and my biological father, who had gotten together after I was 18. So we moved down there to get to know him and just never went through anything, and we were done. We just didn't look for it down there. We just escaped the state, and you know, I didn't know where to get it, and I didn't look for it. So, and once I got pregnant 3 days later, that definitely helped also. But we just,
Well, there's
I
a
don't even
lot to
remember if there
that.
was a catalyst. It just, we decided we were getting
Yeah.
sober.
Well, and that's your mental state and your mind state when it comes to finally making that decision. People don't realize how much of a grip your mind will have on you when it comes to pulling yourself out of an addiction. Like you were saying, you still wanted to do it. You were experiencing physical withdrawals from it, but when you decided to make that change, it's just like I'm done. And I think that holds true with a lot of things. Obviously, when I detoxed off heroin and opiates and everything else, there are physical awful withdrawals that come with that. But if you have that that if you've made that decision in your mind where you're like, I'm just done, I don't want to do this anymore, you're tired, you're fed up, it does make it much easier. So
It does.
it, it it boils down to getting to that point. um so you made the decision. How long were you in Tennessee, and then what prompted you to kind of come back and start working or get the job that you were in? Was there something that led you to get the job that you're currently in, or was there a talk about that a little bit?
Well, we were in Tennessee for about 4 years. I learned some sides of my dad that I was not happy with, but my
And
dad
you
is an
said
alcoholic.
this dad was
So,
the alcoholic, correct?
yes,
Okay.
he's the alcoholic. And he's very sick from it. He has extreme pancreatitis and other things. But he was not a nice man to my mother. And we couldn't really handle that anymore. But honestly, my stepson was still here in Ohio. And, we hadn't been around for 4 years. We saw him a couple of times. But, my kid's dad, he wanted to come back to Ohio, and that's what we did. I mean, there wasn't much of a choice on my end of that matter. But I am glad that we did. Um, but, I learned a lot in my time there. And one thing I learned was that I definitely don't want to be an alcoholic. My drinking never picked up. Like, drinking was never my thing. I was like, that is not going to be me. And so we moved back to Ohio, and I think we were here for about a year before I left. And I went to the domestic violence shelter for about 3 months, and about 2 months after that, I was on meth. One of his, the friend that was my best friend, we ended up dating, and he was a recovering meth addict at the time. He had been in sobriety for about 6 months, I think. And we were doing great. And, he relapsed as it happens. And,
Yeah.
you know, I couldn't understand. Okay. Like, I couldn't understand, like, what was so great about it that you don't want to be sober. Like, look at all of these things you have. Like, what's so great about it that it's keeping you there? And one day he was like, he's like, I'm not asking you to. He's like, but, I've just had the thought lately that, I'd really like to do it with you one time. And in the back of my brain, I was like, he told me I was never allowed to do speed. All right, let's do this. Here's my chance. Like I was breaking every rule that I had ever had at that point in time. Like I was just in this complete rebellious phase. And so I was like, you know what? I really want to try it too. So I did, and I figured out exactly what he couldn't give up. But I do have extreme ADHD, like very, very high ADHD. I'm unmedicated. So meth to me didn't quite turn me into like the normal tweaker. It sat my ass down. My bad. Didn't mean to swear.
No, you can
But
swear. You can swear all you want. I normally drop 20 f bombs a show, so you're good.
okay, cool, because it's like my favorite word. But um, but it literally it sat me down. I would sit there and I would draw, and I've always been into art. But I would sit there and I would draw for hours. I would color for hours. I would paint. I still have my paintings up all over the place. I learned photography. I spent so much of my time with the stars and the moon. It was ridiculous. And, I loved to learn new things. Like, I learned how to drive a backhoe. I learned how to operate a backhoe. I learned how to drive a dump truck. Like, I just wanted to learn new things constantly. But so I think I was just self-medicating. I loved the attention span that I had and that I didn't need to sleep. I mean, I already have insomnia. I'm up all night anyway. Why not be productive with it? And so that took over my life for a year, one solid year. And I got really lucky that it was only a year. By the end of that year, I didn't know myself. He didn't know me either. He was like, I don't know who you are anymore, but I can't stand you. And I was like, I can't stand you either. Like, it had destroyed both of us. And, there was a lot of infidelity on his part throughout that year, and it broke me. This one great relationship that I was supposed to have after this really terrible long relationship, and it broke me and it turned me into this person that I don't want to be. Like, let me tell you what, meth will do some crazy things to your mind. It does. I mean, to the point where like but see, I'm not like a super hateful person, but I can be petty when I want to be. So like I glittered his truck because that was the worst thing I could come up with. I'm not going to destroy your shit, okay? I'm not gonna slash your tires. I'm not gonna, key your car. I'm not gonna, like burn all your stuff. But I will make your life very inconvenient.
I got a story for you real briefly that I want to get back to you. What you were saying. My wife's best friend, her ex-boyfriend used to run motocross, and he was up at a motocross meet, got hurt really bad, like hospitalized hurt. So Jane, I won't mention her name. Her friend drives a couple hours to go down to Tennessee to see him in the hospital. Gets there, and he's in a coma, and she picks up his phone to call his mother, and it's just all these texts of girls that he's and they were together like 2 years at this point. Like it was serious. She would travel with him all the time, like to these motocross events. So she finds all these text messages. She calls his mom, says, "I think you need to come down here and be with." So I'm not going to mention his name either. So and so, and so she said, "I'm not going to be here when you get here." And the mother's like, "Why? What's going on?" And she's like, "I don't want to talk about it. Tell him we'll talk later." So he wakes up, she goes to his apartment, and she put glitter all on his ceiling fans. He had like four of them through the house, just doused them with glitter. And then obviously, you know where that went. But it was
That
funny
is the
you said
most
glitter
epic thing I've ever heard in my
because,
life.
because, and I never thought about the glitter, but you can't get glitter out of shit. So it doesn't matter if it's 4 years down the road, you're going to see a speck of glitter and you're going to be like, oh, I was such an asshole.
That was my literal whole thought process was like, I don't care how much you vacuum this, you are never going to get this out. You're going to be finding glitter on you for years, and you're going to think about this moment.
And you're gonna think about it. No, that's awesome. I told my wife, I said, and to any females out there, don't go to jail keying a car. Don't go to jail beating somebody's windows out. Douse their shit with glitter.
But it only works if they're not a fan of glitter, you know? Like if
Right?
they
Yeah.
hate glitter, like I have a friend, he's like, I don't really care about glitter, and I was like, damn it. Like, but like, man, if they really hate glitter, it is like the best revenge you will ever get in your life because
It really
it's the
is.
gift that keeps on giving.
Yep.
It really is the gift that keeps on giving.
And it's like psychological warfare. I would be because I get very like down on myself for stuff that I've done, like people I've done wrong in the past. I would look at that 4 years down the road and be like, oh, and I'd go through it for a week.
Like
So
his current girlfriend messaged or talked to me a couple months later, and she's like, it was so funny because apparently some glitter that I did not intentionally put on his actual stuff when I gave it back ended up in there. Like I think one of the kids got a hold of one of my glitters and did something because he was like, "You had to put it on my stuff too," and I was like, "Actually, I didn't do that, but that's epic." A couple months later, there was a speck of glitter on his face, and she said something to him like, "Why is there glitter on his face?" And he was like, "I haven't seen her, I swear." It was just, it was so great. She's like, "You should have seen his face. He was freaking out." But it was
so
great.
funny.
But I did end up, as soon as that relationship, well, in October 1st of 2020, I was still with him, but it was like the very end of our relationship. And I was parked in a parking lot of somewhere that I had spent most of my time doing meth at this, we called it the shop. And I was in the back of the parking lot waiting for the dude to show up so we could go inside or whatever. And he took forever on tweaker time. It happens.
Yeah.
So I was sitting there and it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and I decide to draw a tree, right? So I'm like, I've got the headlights on and I fall asleep. I'm with a friend of mine. He's in the front seat. He's sleeping. So I was just by myself and I took out the stuff and, I must have left it on my lap and I didn't realize. I could have left it in the backpack that was his backpack, which is where it was originally, and I took it out and I used it. And apparently I had just been up for way too long and I couldn't stay awake anymore. So I fell asleep with my car running, with my lights on, just in the parking lot. So somebody saw that, thought I was overdosed on heroin, and so they called the cops. So I wake up to 2 ambulances and 6 cop cars surrounding me. And I'm like, oh my God. Like he's banging on the window, like, and he's like, hi. And I'm like, hi. Like, and he's like, are you guys okay? And I was like, oh yeah, we're totally fine, da da da. And he's like, well, can you step out of the vehicle for me? And I was like, sure, why not? And I open up the door and go to stand up, and the entire case falls open on the ground in front of him. And he's like, what's that? And I was like, speed. He's like, what kind of speed? He's like, meth. He's like, oh, okay. He's like, you want to get your buddy up over there? And I'm like, Mark, like, get up, get up, get up. And so, oh my God, like it was terrifying. And, I honestly am so grateful for one of these cops. I think it was shift change, honestly, because like I started with these couple of cops and then all of a sudden these sheriffs showed up. And I don't know, maybe I was just in a different jurisdiction or something. I don't know, but these sheriffs showed up. And so he takes over, and I wish I knew his name. I really do. I do not remember his name. And I have never seen him again. I've seen a lot of the other cops that were there that night, but I've never seen this man again. And he pulls me to the side and he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. I don't even do it that often, which I mean, at that point was an everyday thing. For about 6 months, it had become every day. And I was like, it helps me concentrate. It helps me this. It helps me that. And he's like, I see a couple car seats in the back of your car. He's like, you a mom? I was like, I am. And he's like, where's your kids? And I was like, well, one of them's with my mom and one of them's with their dad right now. And he's like, okay. He's like, you trying to lose them? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, you're doing a bang up job of that. And he's like, you need to get yourself right. He's like, this is not okay. He's like, what are you doing to those babies? He's like, do you want to see them going to their dad? Do you want to see them going with your mom? He's like, I don't ever want to, he's like, I don't ever want to see you again. And I was like, I don't ever want to see you again either. Like, he's like, right. And he's like, I'm going to give you 2 options. You can either come with me down to the station. He's like, or you can go to the hospital and get checked out. And I was like, what? He's like, not a hard question. Do you want to go to the hospital and get checked out or come with me? And I was like, hospital. Absolutely, the hospital. He was like, that sounds like a good choice. And so, then this other cop who had been talking to that buddy of mine, he comes over and he's like, we're not taking them. And he's like, what? And he's like, we're not taking them. He's like, they said we're not taking them. And that was so sketchy to me. I was like, wait, so this one cop is planning on taking us and this other cop just randomly comes over and goes, we're not taking them? So like, I mean, meth brain kicks in and I'm like, what did he say? Is he, a snitch? Is he, whatever? Like it went through my mind, which he was not, by the way. Like it was just one of those things. And so he told me, he's like, okay, we're going to go test this. And if it comes back as methamphetamines, you're going to have a warrant. And I was like, okay. Now, mind you, I don't know what to do with a warrant. I'm a good kid, okay? I don't get in trouble. I don't do bad things. I'm freaking out. And that was October 1st of 2020. That guy wasn't there for me in the way that I needed him to be. And I was like, you know what, forget this. And I left on October 5th. And by October 14th, on my second court date, I was sober because I didn't know I was going to get sober that day. I had no idea that was going to be the last time I was going to use meth. But I went to court. They scheduled me for, I turned myself in because I found out I had warrants. And now, mind you, I did not tell nobody in my entire family, in my entire world, outside of the people that I used with, knew I got high. Nobody, not a single person. My best friend, my little ride or die best friend that I hung out with every single day, did not know I was high. I don't know how, but she did not. And I think a lot of it was just her not wanting to see it. I tried to talk to her at one point about it, and she kind of blew me off, which was really weird for her. So I think she knew, she just didn't want to know. And so literally nobody knew. And that was like the hardest thing for me, was trying to figure out how to tell everybody, because now I have a warrant. I'm going to jail. And so my car got towed that day that I got my charge, right? And I was like, oh, it was at the shop and I don't know what happened. And like, it just seemed so sketchy. So, like, of course, people are just like looking it up, right? My mom's best friend looked it up. She's good at that stuff, and tells my mom. So thank God that that woman told my mom before me, because my mom had time to wig out on her best friend and freak out and whatnot first. But so she told her, and my mom comes to freak out on me, and I was like, hey, mom, you remember all of those times that I could have made your life a living hell in high school, and I could have done this, and I could have skipped school, and I could have been doing drugs, and I could have been, all of those things. She's like, are you asking me for a freebie right now? And I was like, yes. And she goes, you get one. And I was like, one's all I need. One's all I need. And like my mom totally like let it go, and she was mad, but she was there for me through the whole thing. I went, I got high the night before court because I'm going to jail. I'm going to go to jail high. Like, I mean, I'm not going to go in sober. And they sent me to book in, book out. So I did that, and um, they spelled my name wrong in the system. Me and my mom thought it was hilarious. Like, oh, they spelled your name wrong. Till I went back to court and they were like, oh yeah, she didn't book in, book out. And I was like, yes, I did. Yes, I did. They spelled my name wrong. We saw it on mobile patrol. So I had to go do it again. So the only time I've
Oh,
spent in jail,
geez.
thank God, was in a holding cell. But I literally was there in a holding cell for so long. I was supposed to go to probation afterwards. But I was in a holding cell so long that the probation officer was closed. So they told me to go on Monday, and by Monday my system was clean. So I never failed at probation, so I never had to go to jail. Thank God. I really lucked out. In a lot of ways, I've lucked out along the way. My meth didn't have any fentanyl in it. Thank God for that, because nowadays there is no meth anymore. We used to have a counselor at work that made a joke that it's just methanol, like it's just methanol now. So I was extremely lucky, that I did not end up with anything. But I went through my IOP. I did everything I was supposed to before the courts told me to. And I finished up everything with no probation violations or anything. And literally the day that I got released from probation, my sponsor also works in this field, and she called me. She said, "You want a job?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I want a job." And with that day, I had a job at Recovery Works. And so I never went through, a detox meth. I stayed home and I slept for a couple of days, and I was really cranky. And I hung out with a lot of sober people, maybe not people that were sober, but not addicts, I guess we'll go with. Um, and to keep my mind busy. And, I had to keep my mind busy because I wanted it so much. But meth is a mental battle. So there's no physical withdrawal. So you don't go to detox for it. And, I think that that's wrong in a lot of ways, because staying away from it is the hardest part. It might not be a physical withdrawal. I might not relapse because I'm in so much pain that I can't handle it, or because I'm so sick and I need it. It's a mental thing. I need it, and I need it mentally. Like, and it is the one of the worst things I've ever experienced, was getting through that.
What I have to say, and that was one of the things I wanted to talk about with you as well too, was the fact that there's not beds available for people coming off meth. Now, I do understand the medical field's stance on that, but I will say, as a complete heroin junkie addict, the the things that I took away from detox the most was the support, the learning about where I could go to get help, them placing me in help, them placing me in like long term facilities. It's so I think maybe the the treatment industry is maybe dropping the ball on this. I don't know. What's your take
Well,
on what would be
a lot of
your
times, a
what
lot
would
of
be
times they send them
your
to
solution?
residential. A lot of times they send them to a residential program, which does work. It's a 30-day program, and it's not as intense as like a detox because there's no meds for it. It's just kind of getting you off the street. But if that residential bed isn't available, like they're going to be right back out there when maybe there is a detox bed available. And occasionally we do take people for meth. It's very, very rare. Usually there's another substance involved also. But, you know, and like I feel like a lot of people know that the detoxes won't take them, so they won't make the call. They won't make the call for the help. And it just sucks. Like I have a lot of people that come in and they're like, "Yeah, I drank a beer just so I could come in here. I drank a twist of tea just so I could come in here." And the fact that you have to go and choose another substance to get into detox just so you can get yourself off the street, it sucks. And then you get in there and everybody's like, "Oh, you're just meth." Yeah, it's not just meth though. It's a it's
No.
a battle just in itself. Like it might not be heroin. And I'm very glad that I never had any fentanyl, heroin, xylazine, anything in my stuff because this xylazine stuff is scary. Like
I've
this
never
new
even heard of
xylazine.
it.
It's basically the new fentanyl that they're putting in heroin. Like I don't even think heroin exists anymore, honestly. It's just fentanyl and xylazine. But xylazine is kind of like crocodile. It as soon as you inject it, it starts eating your skin. If you snort it or anything, it starts causing big holes in your skin. So I've got these people coming in with these giant sores because everything has xylazine in it nowadays. It's not just the fentanyl that's killing people, and xylazine is Narcan resistant. So not only do we have this new designer drug, but it's Narcan resistant, so there's no way to save you if you overdose. And it's so scary out there. And like I got sober 3 years ago, and the game has changed so much in just that small amount of time.
Well, I've been out. Like I said, I've been out of prison for it was 10 years on September 21st when I released this podcast. That was my daughter's birthday. That was I was fighting it. I was fighting to get home, and they told me I would be home for my daughter's birthday. But so 10 years I've been home, and the 2 years ago when I relapsed, it was on cocaine. It was stupid. It is what it was. But the heroin game 10 years ago, fentanyl was just coming into the mix. Like fentanyl wasn't really a big thing 10 years ago. So I consider myself extremely fortunate that I never got caught up in all of that. Like because I talk to guys and I see guys and I hear stories and I'm like, dude, it's terrifying. Like what you could run into. And now you're saying they're putting it in meth and they're putting all this other like xylazine or whatever this bullshit is.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I'm very fortunate that 10 years ago was the last time I dealt with any opiates because I don't know if I would make it out. Like,
And, it's extremely terrifying because, your dealers that are, breaking up your heroin, your fentanyl, whatever, they're using the same scale that they're breaking up your weed on, right? So all of that is getting on the weed, and these kids are dying because they want to smoke a joint for the first time, but it's
yep,
covered in fentanyl or whatever, and these kids are dying because they wanted to smoke a joint. And like it's so terrifying. I'm so scared for my kids, when they get older. I know they're going to want to try things, and I mean, especially with weed becoming legal now, I mean, the only thing I can hope is that they're smart about it if they ever make that choice. And I'm open with my kids don't quite know yet what I went through. They've been to my meetings with me. They go to my meetings, but they're 7 and 8. They don't really know, and I haven't talked to them about it. I'm sure they'll have questions at some point. They still question me on why I have to go to a meeting every week, but can you just skip it tonight, Mom? Why you gotta go to your meeting? Like, cause it's really important for me, baby. Like, it's really important. And especially my crystal meth meeting that I go to, I run that. I'm now the secretary of that.
oh, that's
And
awesome.
right. And that was the meeting that genuinely helped me at first. When I found that meeting, I went for my 90-day chip. I wanted a 90-day chip. And I had gone to an AA and I just didn't feel comfortable. It happened to be like an old school AA. My bad. But so I was like, there's got to be something out here. I know there's Heroin's Anonymous. There's got to be something. And when I found CMA, there was only two in the entire state, one in Columbus and one in Kent. And I
Oh
found
wow.
one in Kent, thank God. And now there's probably 6 or 7, I think, in the state. But it was my home. And I do actually go to a Heroin Anonymous meeting on Thursdays also, but it's the same people. And it's an open meeting and all of that, but
Yeah.
they're my home. And so, I go to both of those. But really, I love my job and helping people, whether it's at my meetings or at my job, and I want to be, my end goal is to be an IOP counselor.
So
So that's why I want to go.
let's talk about your job real quick, and then we'll get into your future goals, because I think a lot of people that deal with drug addiction, they come out and they get clean, and it's the guy Drifter that I talk to this guy daily. He's a great guy, but it's we have as addicts, once we clean up, we have just the urge and the want to help other people. So, like, to show them the way out, like to help them get out of the trenches. So talk about that. Like, where are you? What are you doing at Pinnacle right now? Like, explain what you're doing at Pinnacle, and kind of your motivation for continuing to do it.
Well, right now I'm a tech, and basically I am the one that spends all day with them. From the time they get up until dinner when I leave. I am the one that's on the floor. I am getting them whatever they need, whether it's a snack, whether it's a conversation, whether it's they need a counselor, they need whatever. But really, we're the first line. When they want to leave, the tech is the first one in front of them trying to convince them to stay. And, if we fail, we pass it on to somebody else that maybe be able to reach them or something like that. But we're we're the ones that, make sure they're okay. We're the ones that check on them and make sure they're alive, make sure they're doing okay, make sure they're mentally okay, make sure they're physically okay, grab the nurse if something happens. Um, and if we notice that somebody's not acting right, but we learn these people, and it's not quite a friendship, but at the same time, it's like a mutual respect and friendship on some level. They're just human beings like I am. And I treat them as such. I don't treat them any better. I don't treat them any worse. They are just the same as me. And, some people come into this job and don't, oh, I've been through this, and they don't quite treat them as if they're human yet. And, that's not what they need. They need to feel like they still have something to live for. And, sometimes just talking to them is all that they need.
Yeah.
And so I want to move up eventually, but I love my position as a tech, being with them all the time. Any other position that I have, I would not have the rapport with them that I do. And they come in like, if I've had them way more than once, 5, 6 times. Like we have that kind of relationship that I will bounce into the room and bounce on the bed and be like, "Hey, buddy, did you miss me?" And they're like, "Oh God, no, I'm so sorry, I'm
You
back." Well, you don't have to be
again.
sorry to me. Like, I'm here to support you. Like, I'm just glad to see your face. It's alive. I'm happy to see you. If nobody else told you that today, I'm happy to see you. I may not, maybe it'd be better under different circumstances, but I'm happy to see you today. And, I think that means a lot to them also, is to know that somebody cares. We had one client that broke my heart. He had endocarditis, and he had been with us a lot of times. He was one of the, I won't want to say favorites, but, he was a frequent
That's
flyer.
water around the heart, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It's something to do from his drug use, and it messes with your
Yeah.
heart. And we thought he was just like extra sick, and he's like, "No, this isn't detox. Like this isn't detox. I need help." But he wouldn't go down to the ER, and he ended up passing away. Oh, like 3 days after we sent him to another hospital. Um, and his roommate called us to tell us that he knew that he was dying, and he came to us because we were the only people in his life that he felt cared and loved him, and it broke our
Well,
heart.
yeah, there's I remember it, and I've told this story. So for the listeners that are listening again, I'm sorry, but I'm going to tell it again because she hasn't heard it. But it's the whole level of compassion, you know. So I got caught burglarizing homes. I'm going to make it quick because I've told this story 100 times on here. The,
You're
the
fine.
the day that I got caught burglarizing the home, I was at a point where my mother, my family, my kids, I wasn't even allowed to see my kids at that point. I was homeless. There was no compassion. I remember, like, my brother came and picked me up one day. I was leaning up against a wall, like sitting against a wall at Chapel Hill Mall, and he just happened to be driving by. I had my phone charging on the inside of like the but he picks me up, and I get in the car, and he's like, "Man," he was like, "You stink. Like you smell like you smoked 10 packs of cigarettes. Like, what's going on?" I was like, "I don't have anywhere to go." And he's like, "Well," and nobody was letting me come stay with him. And I don't blame him. Like, I was stealing anything I could get my hands on. But the day, so to go a month or so being completely homeless. And the day that I got caught in that house, the old man, it was the first ounce of compassion I had ever, because here I am. I'm like, I just got caught robbing your house. Like, you're safe. And like some other, your jewelry box is literally sitting right by your door. You catch me in your house. He was a little old man. And I break down in tears and I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I wasn't, again, I wasn't sorry I got caught. I was sorry because I knew I was hurting people. Like, I knew I was causing damage and I was so tired. Like, I was so tired, just ready to give up on everything. I just wanted out. Like, and so I was almost thankful, and I was thankful I was getting caught at that point, because I'm like, hey, I need somewhere to go, first of all. And, I told him, I said, I'm not going to put my hands on you. I said, just call the cops. Let's get this over with. And I walked out. I said, I'm going to go sit on your front porch. I said, don't touch me. I said, I have no intention on hurting you, on touching you or anything like that. The old man came out and he like stood beside me, and I'm sobbing on his doorstep. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he was like, he was like, I can tell you're better than this. Like, don't. And it's that compassion. And that's always stuck with me. It's almost like a God moment where just that little ounce of compassion, it stuck with me all through prison. That man that had every right to either shoot me or scream at me or put his hands on me told me I was better than that. And all these people that I loved that I'd hurt, none of them were telling me that I was better than that at that point. They were all fed up. And this man that had no idea who I was, but yet I was about to walk out of your house with half your shit, you put your hand on your shoulder and you were like, hey, you're better than this. And it just stuck with me. And I think that's the biggest thing with addicts trying to get sober. And I commend you for doing it. Like you said, you're doing it on a day in and day out basis. You just show them compassion. You don't give them money. You don't give them a place to stay. You keep them at arm's length. You show them tough love, but always be compassionate with them. Always be understanding. Always be an ear or a shoulder to lean on, somebody to talk to, because like I said, ultimately that's the one point in everything that's stuck with me up to now that I always fall back on, and it's that old man's voice. And I think he's passed away at this point, because I've wanted to go back and thank him. But when I came, he was older. When I came home, one of my friends worked with him, and I think she had said that he had passed away. But I always wanted to thank him because, like I said, that little ounce of compassion, it's like a little mustard seed, and it's stuck with me, and it's grown into 10 years of me building a really great life for myself. So I commend you to keep doing that. Like, I think and I'm getting like a little choked up. That's just something that, it's needed. People don't show drug addicts compassion. They're looked at as the scum of the earth. And so keep doing what you're doing. If he sneezes on me. Yeah, why do you work in the medical field where it's the number one thing is to help people, and you're gonna, yeah, act like that? So, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 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 It doesn't. Listen, as a former heroin addict, it doesn't matter. Drugs are drugs, addiction's addiction. It doesn't matter. You went through the trenches just like everybody else. So it's it always bugs me when people get those little, because I've been in meetings and group and everything else. They're like, "Oh, you don't know." I'm like, "Dude, shut." And they're not even talking to me. I'm like, "Dude, shut the fuck up." Like what? Like it's all the same, man. Yeah, that's funny. You're doing your you're getting your CDC, and I will say we are coming up on an hour, so I don't like holding people up longer than an hour usually. So I'll go ahead and wrap this, but I do want to tell you real quick, if you are talking to people, and I want to push this to you primarily because it's a great website. It's the Sobertown website. They do daily Zoom meetings for recovery. They do crystal meth meetings. They do heroin. They do alcohol. They do all in all. They have mental health meetings. They have like 300 and some podcasts on there. If you're talking to people at Pinnacle, feel free to push them over there. They're great people. They have Telegram groups. They have meetings all day long, virtual meetings. Always feel free to do that. But I will roll this back just a little bit. I want to commend you on what you've done. I love watching people who have come out of addiction and decided to help other people. That it speaks volumes to your heart, it speaks volumes to your character, it speaks volumes just in general as to who you are. And I think the world needs more people like you that have been through they've had a rough go at it, and they are trying to be the light at the end of the tunnel for other people. Lead by example. So I commend you for everything you're doing. Um, Definitely, I know we're friends on Facebook now, so I'll keep watching you. Keep me up to date on what you're doing with your CDC. When you get it, we'll come back on and we'll talk about it, what it took to get it. Um, Anybody that's making, I always say, I don't want to grow along stagnant people. I started this to help people. I started this to give people resources. If you've got felons that come into your facility and they're like, I can't find a job, I can't find housing, so on and so forth, shoot them over to the website. It's webuildmonsters.org. Um, I've got all kinds of resources put up on the website on there. So I'm going to continue to watch you. I'm going to continue to root for you. I think you're doing amazing things. Is there anything that you want to tell anybody else up to this point? Well, thank you. That's what I appreciate that. But like I said, the world needs the world needs more positivity, and it's turning to be a dark. We're getting into back into the dark ages at this point. So all right, Tori. Well, I greatly appreciate you again. I will keep up with you on Facebook. We'll have you back at some point in time, and you can tell us about all the new accomplishments you've achieved. So all right, thank you so much, Tori. Guys, we will check you next time. Have a great afternoon, guys. See ya.